More than 2.5 years into Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine, the Russian president finds himself grappling with a cascade of failures that threaten not just his political future, but also the stability of the Russian Federation itself. Far from achieving the renewed glory he promised, Putin's war has weakened Russia economically, politically, and socially. This decline, exacerbated by mismanagement and international isolation, is driving the nation toward a potential collapse from which recovery may be near impossible. At first glance, Russia's economy appears to be weathering the storm of international sanctions and war expenditures. Reports from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, in April 2024 suggested that Russia could achieve a growth rate of 3.2% by the end of the year, outperforming many European economies. Oil exports remain steady, and government spending has buoyed some sectors of the economy. However, these surface-level statistics obscure a far grimmer reality. Russia's economy is dangerously reliant on war, and the underlying structural weaknesses are mounting. Swedish economist Anders Åslund, writing for Project Syndicate, highlights the economic hurdles that Russia faces, including technological stagnation, financial instability, and demographic decline. The sanctions imposed by Western nations have carved away between 2% and 3% of Russia's GDP annually, while inflation and interest rates have surged to unsustainable levels. The official inflation rate hovers at 9.1%, but hidden inflation likely pushes real figures higher. Interest rates have soared to 19%, stifling consumer spending and business investment. Meanwhile, the war is draining the national reserve, which now holds just $55 billion, down from $183 billion in 2021. Even the seemingly positive growth figures are misleading. Putin has transformed Russia's economy into a war machine, with an estimated 10% of GDP allocated to military spending in 2024. This focus comes at the expense of critical sectors like infrastructure, education, and healthcare. Without a diversified economic foundation, the cracks in Russia's economic armor are rapidly widening. Russia's economy has been in decline since 2013, when its GDP stood at $2.3 trillion. Following the annexation of Crimea and the subsequent imposition of sanctions, that figure has dropped to $1.9 trillion. The ongoing war has accelerated this decline. As Åslund notes, Russia's dependence on war spending is not sustainable, and the country risks an economic meltdown by 2025. The Hill predicts growing immiseration and social discontent as the government runs out of resources to sustain its population while continuing its military campaign. The consequences of these economic pressures are already visible in everyday life. A cost of living crisis, fueled by inflation and high interest rates, is pushing ordinary Russians to the brink. The situation is compounded by a lack of investment in public infrastructure, which is crumbling under the strain of neglect and overuse. Russia's reliance on outdated Soviet-era infrastructure is a glaring symptom of its broader decline. In February 2024, NBC News reported on the dire conditions faced by Russians in cities like Novosibirsk. Residents endured sub-zero temperatures without reliable heating due to repeated failures in the city's hot water and heating systems. These problems are not isolated. They are part of a national crisis affecting urban and rural areas alike. Economist Igor Lipsitz notes that much of Russia's critical infrastructure, including heating systems, dates back to the 1970s and 1980s. Years of neglect have left these systems worn out and prone to failure. In the winter of 2023-2024 alone, there were 577 major incidents affecting critical infrastructure across 59 regions. Moscow, Russia's wealthiest city, experienced 31 of these incidents, underscoring the pervasive nature of the problem. Annually, there are approximately 7,000 such incidents, with most attributed to aging infrastructure. Despite repeated promises to address these issues, little progress has been made. In October 2024, Anatoly Seryshev, a Russian presidential envoy, claimed that Putin was personally overseeing efforts to improve Siberia's infrastructure. However, the lack of tangible results has fueled public discontent, particularly in regions like the Urals and Siberia, where residents feel abandoned by the federal government. The combination of economic hardship and infrastructural decay is fostering growing resentment among Russia's population. This discontent is particularly acute in marginalized regions, which have historically been neglected by Moscow. Areas like Tuva and Siberia not only suffer from systemic underinvestment, but also bear a disproportionate share of the human cost of war. Soldiers from these regions are sent to the front lines in far greater numbers than those from affluent cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg. The dissatisfaction in these regions poses a significant threat to Putin's grip on power. As economic conditions worsen and public services deteriorate, the risk of regional uprisings or separatist movements increases. Such instability could further fracture the already strained Russian Federation. Russia's struggles have significant ramifications for the international community. Putin's war in Ukraine is not just a military conflict. It is a test of the resilience of authoritarian regimes in the face of global resistance. By exposing the weaknesses of Russia's political and economic systems, Ukraine and its allies are sending a clear message. Authoritarianism is not sustainable in the long term. For NATO and the European Union, this moment represents an opportunity to strengthen their collective security frameworks and support Ukraine's resistance. It also underscores the importance of maintaining economic and diplomatic pressure on Russia. The sanctions regime, while not without challenges, has proven effective in weakening Russia's economic foundation. Continued international solidarity is essential to ensuring that Russia's aggression does not go unchecked. Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine was meant to restore Russia's glory and secure its position as a global power. Instead, it has exposed the fragility of the Russian state. The country's economy is teetering on the edge of collapse, its infrastructure is failing, and its people are growing increasingly disillusioned. As the costs of war mount and public discontent rises, the question is not if Russia will face a reckoning, but when. The warning signs are clear: a collapsing economy, a crumbling infrastructure, and a disillusioned population. If these trends continue, Russia may find itself in a position of irreversible decline, its ambitions shattered by the very leader who promised to elevate it. The countdown to Russia's collapse has begun, and time is running out for Vladimir Putin to alter the trajectory of his nation. Vladimir Putin's prolonged war in Ukraine has unleashed a cascade of crises across Russia, leaving the country grappling with infrastructural failures, demographic decline, and a stretched military apparatus. What began as a special military operation intended to reassert Russia's dominance has instead revealed the fragility of its political, economic, and military systems. The mounting pressure on Russia, compounded by international isolation, paints a stark picture of a nation inching toward collapse. Russia's rail system, a lifeline for the nation's vast geography and its war effort, is showing signs of severe strain. The invasion of Ukraine's Kursk Oblast highlighted this fragility. Moscow allocated a significant portion of its railway fleet to transport soldiers to the region, but many trains were ultimately abandoned. Compounding this problem, Western sanctions have limited Russia's access to critical spare parts needed to maintain its aging railway infrastructure. The parallels to Russia's heating crisis are evident. Outdated Soviet-era systems, neglected for decades, are now buckling under the strain of prolonged war and economic mismanagement. This lack of investment in critical infrastructure is not a new phenomenon. As the Jamestown Foundation notes, the war has merely amplified Russia's long-standing infrastructural deficiencies. Billions of dollars funneled into military operations have left little for domestic investment, fueling public discontent. Russians are freezing in their own homes, with the government seemingly powerless or unwilling to address the deepening crisis. Beyond the crumbling infrastructure, Russia faces a demographic catastrophe exacerbated by the war. Waves of Russian citizens fled the country shortly after Putin launched his military campaign. Among the nearly 1 million who left were professionals and highly skilled workers seeking to escape potential conscription. This brain drain has dealt a severe blow to Russia's already struggling economy, stripping the country of the expertise needed to sustain industries and public services. For those who remained, the war has exacted a devastating toll. Over 720,000 Russian soldiers are dead or injured, leaving nearly 1.7 million individuals primarily men, either killed or incapacitated. This figure represents not just a loss of manpower for the war effort, but a crippling reduction in the workforce needed to maintain the nation's economic output. The demographic damage caused by the war extends far beyond the battlefield and is reshaping Russian society. Russia's demographic crisis predates the Ukraine war, but has worsened significantly under Putin's leadership. The Atlantic Council reports that as of 2023, 30% of Russia's population consisted of non-Russian ethnic groups, a figure expected to grow due to significantly higher birth rates among minority communities compared to ethnic Russians. Urbanization has further compounded the issue, as 70% of ethnic Russians reside in cities where birth rates are significantly lower than in rural areas. The war's staggering death toll among Russian men has created an imbalance that experts fear will be impossible to reverse. While some speculate about a potential baby boom among native Russians in response to wartime losses, such an outcome is unlikely given current conditions. Wartime uncertainty, economic hardship, and the looming threat of additional mobilizations have left many Russians hesitant to start families. Official data paints a grim picture. Russia's birth rate in the first half of 2024 was the lowest in 25 years. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has called the situation catastrophic for the future of the nation, underscoring the gravity of the crisis. Adding to this challenge, the Kremlin's restrictive immigration policies have worsened the labor shortage. In October 2024, Russia halved its annual quota for foreign residence permits, reducing it to 5,500 from 10,600 in 2023. While this aligns with Putin's nationalist agenda, it comes at a time when Russia desperately needs foreign workers to sustain its economy. The combination of war-induced population loss and restrictive immigration policies has created a cycle of decline that threatens Russia's long-term stability. As Russia struggles to maintain its war effort, signs of desperation have become increasingly apparent. The prolonged campaign has drained its arsenal, forcing the military to rely on aging Soviet-era equipment. Tanks like the T-55, first introduced in the 1950s, have become a common sight on the battlefield. According to The Economist, 85% of the 1,530 tanks delivered by Russia in 2023 were Soviet-era models. These dwindling stockpiles underscore the unsustainable nature of Russia's military operations. In addition to equipment shortages, Russia faces a severe manpower crisis. The loss of hundreds of thousands of soldiers has stretched the military thin, prompting Moscow to seek external support. This desperation has driven Putin into an alliance with North Korea, a nation known for its isolation and systemic poverty. In June 2024, Russia signed a defense pact with North Korea, pledging mutual assistance in the event of attacks on either nation's territory. Russia wasted little time in leveraging its new alliance with North Korea. When Ukraine launched an offensive in the Kursk Oblast, Putin called upon his North Korean ally for reinforcements. Between October and November 2024, approximately 11,000 to 12,000 North Korean soldiers were deployed to Russia, joining a 50,000-strong counteroffensive in Kursk. This move underscores Russia's reliance on external partners to sustain its war effort, even as it further isolates itself from the international community. The alliance with North Korea also raises concerns about the transfer of military technology. North Korea's access to Russian weaponry, including drones and missile systems, could exacerbate tensions on the Korean peninsula and beyond. For Putin, this alliance is a short-term solution to a long-term problem, but it comes at the cost of aligning Russia with a regime that is both internationally ostracized and economically destitute. The cumulative effects of war, economic mismanagement, and demographic decline have left Russia teetering on the edge of collapse. The infrastructure that underpins the nation's daily life is crumbling, its population is shrinking, and its military is running out of both manpower and equipment. Public discontent is growing, particularly in regions like Siberia and the Urals, where residents feel abandoned by the federal government. Russia's alliance with North Korea may provide temporary relief on the battlefield, but it does little to address the underlying issues plaguing the country. Instead, It highlights Putin's increasing desperation and willingness to align with pariah states to sustain his war effort. Putin's ambitions to restore Russia's glory have instead exposed the nation's weaknesses. The war in Ukraine has drained Russia's resources, decimated its population, and revealed the fragility of its infrastructure and economy. As public discontent grows and the nation's challenges mount, the question is not whether Russia will face a reckoning, but when. The signs of collapse are clear: a failing economy, a declining population, and a military stretched to its limits. Unless significant changes are made, Russia may soon find itself unable to sustain its current trajectory, leaving the country at a crossroads that will define its future for decades to come. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine has laid bare the vulnerabilities of the Russian Federation under Vladimir Putin's leadership. What was once seen as a formidable superpower has revealed itself as a fractured state plagued by economic turmoil, demographic decline, military desperation, and corruption. Now reliant on alliances with pariah states like North Korea, Russia faces the dual challenge of sustaining its war effort while preventing internal collapse. Russia's alliance with North Korea is emblematic of its increasing desperation. While partnerships between nations are common during wartime, relying on a regime as isolated and volatile as Kim Jong-un's raises critical questions about Russia's strength and strategic judgment. The arrival of 11,000 North Korean soldiers in Russia signals more than just the need for manpower. It highlights the collapse of domestic support for Putin's war. By avoiding a second wave of domestic mobilization, Putin acknowledges the growing anti-war sentiment in a country already strained by economic hardship and infrastructure failures. The implications of this alliance are troubling. Alexander Gabuev of the Carnegie Russia Eurasia Center notes that North Korea stands to gain valuable combat experience and, more importantly, strategic military capabilities from Russia. These could include advanced weapons technology, missile systems, or even nuclear expertise. Such transfers pose a direct threat to global stability, particularly as Kim Jong-un's regime continues to issue provocations against the West. Unlike Putin's often rhetorical threats, North Korea's unpredictable leadership may act on its ambitions, emboldened by Russian support. Russia's reliance on North Korea underscores a deeper issue: a crippling shortage of manpower. Over 720,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or injured in Ukraine, and an additional million citizens, many of them skilled professionals, have fled the country to escape conscription. This exodus, combined with wartime casualties, has left a significant void in Russia's workforce, further destabilizing an economy already struggling under the weight of sanctions and corruption. The demographic crisis compounds these issues. According to the Atlantic Council, non-Russian ethnic groups now make up 30% of the population, and their growth rates far outpace those of ethnic Russians. Urbanization among ethnic Russians, coupled with the reluctance to raise families amidst wartime uncertainty, has driven the birth rate to its lowest point in 25 years. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov has described this situation as catastrophic for the future of the nation. But government policies have done little to address the decline. By halving its foreign residence permit quotas in 2024, the Kremlin has further exacerbated its labor shortage at a time when it can least afford to lose workers. The inefficiencies within Russia's military-industrial complex are another symptom of systemic corruption. In June 2024, Putin removed Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, replacing him with Andrei Belousov, in a move ostensibly aimed at increasing innovation. However, Shoigu's tenure had been marked by widespread graft, which hindered the development of modern weapons systems. Russia's increasing reliance on Soviet-era equipment, including the T-55 tanks deployed in Ukraine, reflects the consequences of this corruption. Of the 1,530 tanks delivered to the front lines in 2023, 85% were decades-old models. Despite Shoigu's dismissal, corruption remains entrenched within the Kremlin. Shoigu himself was reassigned as Secretary of the Security Council, allowing him to maintain influence within the defense sector. This revolving door of leadership, coupled with Putin's practice of promoting loyalists over competent officials, has created a government incapable of addressing the country's structural weaknesses. Russia's defense spending, which now accounts for 10% of its GDP, has become a feeding ground for cronyism. Wealth intended for the war effort often ends up lining the pockets of Putin's allies, further undermining military effectiveness. As the conversation noted in July 2023, Putin rules through fear and favor, prioritizing regime security over national progress. This system has stymied Russia's potential, leaving the country increasingly reliant on outdated practices and equipment. The cracks within Russia extend beyond its borders. Historically, Moscow has maintained control over its diverse regions and allied nations through a combination of coercion and dependency. However, this grip is weakening. Chechen and Dagestani security forces have clashed, highlighting tensions within Russia's own territories. Meanwhile, traditional allies like Tajikistan are beginning to assert their independence. Following drone attacks and natural disasters, Tajikistan's leadership has emphasized self-reliance rather than dependence on Moscow's support. This erosion of influence signals a broader decline in Russia's ability to project power. As Yuri Olinek, head of research at the Analytical Center of Ukrainian Studies of Strategic Research, explains, the center of the empire no longer works. The Kremlin's inability to manage its internal divisions or support its allies accelerates the disintegration of Russia's status as a regional hegemon. Russia's deepening alliance with North Korea highlights the lengths to which Putin is willing to go to sustain his war effort. In June 2024, the two nations signed a cooperative defense pact, pledging mutual support in the event of an attack on either country's territory. While this partnership has provided Russia with North Korean troops and possibly additional resources, it has also further isolated Russia from the global community. For North Korea, the benefits are clear. Access to Russian technology and resources could enhance its military capabilities, including its nuclear program. For Russia, however, the alliance brings significant risks. Aligning with a nation as isolated and unpredictable as North Korea diminishes Russia's credibility on the world stage and entangles it in a relationship with a regime that has little to lose in escalating tensions with the West. Russia's struggles, economic, demographic, and military, have created a perfect storm of instability. The reliance on foreign troops, corruption within the government, and the erosion of regional influence all point to a nation in decline. While Putin's regime clings to power through propaganda and repression, the underlying fractures within the Russian Federation are becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. The alliance with North Korea may provide temporary relief on the battlefield, but it is emblematic of a nation that has lost its way. Instead of addressing the systemic issues that threaten its future, Russia has tied itself to a pariah state in a desperate bid to sustain its ambitions. The costs of this decision, both domestic and international, will only hasten the collapse of a regime that once sought to restore Russia's greatness. Russia's partnership with North Korea is not a sign of strength, but a symptom of its decline. The nation's economic turmoil, demographic crisis, and military inefficiencies have left it vulnerable, with even its closest allies beginning to distance themselves. As Putin's government prioritizes short-term survival over long-term stability, it risks pushing the Russian Federation toward an irreversible collapse. The lessons of history are clear. No empire can endure without addressing the needs of its people and maintaining the integrity of its institutions. For Russia, the failure to heed these lessons under Putin's leadership may mark the end of its status as a global power, leaving it little more than a shadow of its former self.